Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Now let us get back to more serious conversation. That, as I said earlier, you had a conversation with our colleague, leaders virtually before. And from that and many other writings, we know that you have been following Ethiopian politics very closely. And even there are many developments since you had your first conversation on Prime Media. Our country is anyway now preparing to hold its sixth national election. And meanwhile, there are various external pressures coming on Ethiopian government. And I specifically want to ask your opinion on America's current position on Ethiopia, especially in relation to the conflict in Tigray, on Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and related tensions in the Horn, and probably your opinion on Ethiopia's response or resistance to this pressure coming from the American government.
If people in the West, and in my country, United States, understood Ethiopia and understood Africa, they wouldn't have the problem they're having. You have poverty throughout the whole continent. You have instability. You have insecurity everywhere as a result of lack of economic development, which is a conscious policy that came from the colonial powers. Therefore, if you want to strengthen stability, Ethiopia is key in the Horn of Africa, and it's played a role in Sudan. It sent peacekeeping troops to South Sudan. It helped with the conflict with al-Shabaab. It's a very stable and respected military capability. Therefore, with the conflict going on, which comes from the immediate situation of Tigray, but it's a larger historical problem, we should be looking to strengthen the country and strengthen the government. There have been many conflicting reports. There are reports that came out, which unfortunately were repeated by the U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, that the Ethiopians were involved in ethnic cleansing in Tigray. There have been other statements of that similar quality, which are unfounded, because there's been no evidence to that effect. This inflames the situation, and this encourages not only people in Tigray, but other parts of the country to weaken the government. Nation state is a critical political entity. It's not an amalgamation. It is an entity in and of itself that came about in the 1600s at the Treaty of Westphalia. How do you run a country? How do you give continuity from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next? You have to have a nation state which has obligations. Obligations to defend, protect, and provide for the general welfare of its people. This is, in the U.S. preamble, is the most brilliant paragraph in our Constitution. Ethiopia is struggling to become that kind of nation state. It has embarked on certain economic policies, very bold policies, like the Addis Ababa to Djibouti Railroad. The GERD, which we'll discuss, is a very bold policy, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. But its country has oftentimes been regionalized by ethnicity. That has to be overcome. And we have to establish that the nation is responsible for the welfare of the people. Now, if the Western countries understood that, they would be supporting that. You have, unfortunately, there is a political faction, I would call it a political financial oligarchy, who run or try to run most of the world through their political financial power. They don't want strong nation states. They don't want them anywhere in the world, but they don't want them in Africa, because the policy of Africa has always been to loot, see what you can get out of it. And the Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, represents a potentially very strong leader with a vision for Ethiopia. I don't know every one of his policies. I probably don't agree with every policy he has. Nobody's perfect. But the general thrust of his orientation, I do support. And I do support the Prosperity Party to be a non-ethnic based party. But there are people who like to see Ethiopia weaken. Now, these people are very foolish, because if you weaken a key strategic country, you better be prepared for what's going to happen. And I bring up the case of President Gaddafi in Libya. This was a colossal, stupid policy by the Obama administration. Susan Rice, who's now in the Biden administration, was there in the Obama administration advocating this policy. Samantha Powers, who was in the Obama administration, who advocated the elimination of Gaddafi, she's in the Biden administration. Hillary Clinton was there with President Obama. And this opened up the floodgates that has destroyed the Sahel. The Sahel has not recovered from October 2011. Mali has fallen, northeast Nigeria, Boko Haram grew massively because once Gaddafi held everyone together with an iron hand, but he held everyone together. When he left, the Tuaregs raided the munition camps, took the weapons, and moved southward across the Sahel. And we have not recovered. In October this year will be 10 years. That's the kind of stupidity that is capable, that the West is capable of with Ethiopia. There are some people that say Ethiopia should be dismembered, should be separate states. This will lead to a 30 years war in Ethiopia that Africa will never recover from if we have that kind of separation. So if you're intelligent, which sometimes my government is not so intelligent, you would strengthen nations that you can still have disagreements, but you say to yourselves, we cannot allow this situation to devolve and regional groups to start combating each other and attack the state. From my standpoint, and I did not intervene in any politics in Ethiopia, I refrained from it, but once the TPLF attacked the Northern Defense Forces, that is an act of treason. And the government can only have one response, which is to put down that treason, especially in Africa, because if it's not put down, then other people will follow suit. That caused a very serious conflict, which we have not recovered from, or not finished. But nevertheless, if the nation didn't do that, I believe you wouldn't have Ethiopia today, because the TPLF would have encouraged other groups. And there are outside forces who do want to see Ethiopia weakened for their own reasons. And I think if we're intelligent, we will support a strong government. We will support the election coming up on June 5th, I believe. And we will support dealing with the humanitarian crisis that exists in Tigray.
Yep. One more question maybe, but very quick though. Do you think the statements that are coming out from the U.S. official are backed with any evidence that you make?
Well, when Secretary of State Blinken made this comment about ethnic cleansing, I called up my contacts in Washington, and they said they had seen no evidence to this. That report came from Amnesty International. Amnesty International gets funding from all kinds of people, including George Soros, who is a very pro-regime change character with his Open Society. So there was no official government report that you could read and say, okay, well, let's look into this. Now, when I was in Tigray, and other people I've talked to in the Ethiopian government, no one is denying atrocities. And it's very sad that there are, but they're not denying them. But the question is, who is committing them? And that has to be investigated. And one thing the interim administrator said is we are fully committed to investigating. We have our own Human Rights Commission, which has apparently written a report, but has not been made public. And then the Human Rights Commission of Ethiopia is working with the United Nations. So yes, atrocities have occurred. They should be investigated. But you don't use atrocities to inflame the situation. And I picked up on this. Once I saw ethnic cleansing and genocide, to me, I understood everything that was going on. Because those are the key words you use to destabilize a country. And I worked with the Sudanese for 10 years, combating the accusation of genocide in Darfur. And in the end, there was no genocide in Darfur, but it was used against the Bashir government. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to use it against the government of the prime minister. And once you start throwing those words around without evidence, then I know what the game is. The game is to weaken the country, if not regime change, actually replace the prime minister.
What can they benefit from a weakened Ethiopia anyway?
Well,
given that's a critical, Ethiopia is a key partner
Yes.
in the Horn of Africa.
Well, again, you have certain people who don't think Africans are really as good as everybody else. There's a lot of racism involved. There's a neo-Malthusian concept that there's too many Africans. We have to have population reduction, even though Africa is massively underdeveloped. And they wouldn't mind seeing a war. They wouldn't mind seeing some Africans kill each other. And of course, if you have everyone fighting each other, then these political financial tentacles can come in and manipulate the situation to their benefit. They don't care about the cost of human life. Now, again, I heard Obama a couple of years ago say, "Oh, this was the greatest mistake I ever made."
Yeah, he said.
Yeah, but nevertheless, they made it, and they.
But it's a catastrophe that
they
he left behind his legacies. You know, it's his catastrophe in Syria. And in the previous regime, during Bush, we saw the Iraq crisis.
Same thing.
Again, under the Obama leadership, the Libyan situation that you've raised, the Sahel region.
Yes.
And look at Yemen now.
Yes.
All of these crises happening while U.S. politicians are overseeing all of these crises.
But he also mentioned that those same people who have been, pushing strong nations and strong leaders away are coming back to office now again, right?
Well, you have, in the Biden administration, I would say that I'm pretty knowledgeable. I've been involved in politics for over half a century. I'm an old guy. I've been around a long time. President Biden himself probably doesn't know anything about this too much. He gets a report, he'll get a sheet of paper with a few paragraphs. The people who are going to push this policy is going to be the Secretary of State Blinken, who is an old hand of the establishment. And the establishment is not beholden to either the American people or any other people. They think that they know best of how to run the world. And they think they can dictate policy and tell policy. So they will say, human rights. There's a violation of human rights in Ethiopia. There's a violation of human rights in Ethiopia. But it's a slogan they use to force through their kind of policy. Because actually, if you cared about human rights, you would have more electricity. You would have more roads. You'd have more. If you care about a human being being born, then you want to have food for that human being. You want to have a productive job. They never touch that. They won't even touch that subject. So the human rights to me is very hollow, very insincere. And when they say human rights violations, I say, yes, the number one violation is you're not giving people the right to live. And to live, you need infrastructure, you need electricity, you need railroads. Exactly what Ethiopia is doing. So you should say, okay, well, maybe Ethiopia has some problems, but look what they're doing in the area of infrastructure. Look what they're doing supplying 6.2 gigawatts of power, which will make Ethiopia the second largest energy producer in the world with the Grand Renaissance, in Africa with the Grand Renaissance Dam. They don't understand this. So they have their own view, shaped by this establishment, shaped by their own political, financial interest, political interest, geopolitical interest, how to stay on top, how to control, how to manipulate. And the concerns about the African people, even the American people, that's not their concern. Their concern is holding on and extending their power.